Those stories shortly, but first some breaking news now coming in. The Ministry of External Affairs has now issued another statement on the Doklam issue. The statement says that the disengagement process is almost completed. Under the verification, it further said that an understanding has now been reached on the border issue and it must be scrupulously respected. Now, we are joined by a panel of esteemed guests to join in on this discussion, wall-to-wall coverage on all of this. But before that, let's listen into some reaction. Ramesh Ramachandran standing by in the newsroom with the very latest. Ramesh, new information just coming in from the MEA. What can you tell us? Ramesh Ramachandran standing by in the newsroom with the very latest on this developing information coming in from the Ministry of External Affairs. New information now coming in about the disengagement process. Ramesh, how significant are these updates? All right, we will try to, of course, get Ramesh back in on the development, but let's give you a quick recap on the latest information now coming in. The MEA has now said that there is another statement that they are releasing on the Doklam issue. That statement, again, quoting, says the disengagement process is now almost completed. It is under verification. Also said that the understanding that is now reached on the Doklam border issue and the boundary issue must be respected. All right, let's now go to WION's correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran joining us live from the newsroom. Ramesh, how significant is this very latest development by the MEA?
It is, Archit. If you remember, about 6 or 7 hours ago, we saw the Indian officials issue a formal statement, the first of its kind today, on the disengagement from Doklam standoff. And according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, the disengagement began at around 12 noon India time, or about 2:30 p.m. Beijing time. And in the latest statement, Archit, the Indian Foreign Ministry makes 3 or 4 couple of important points. One, to begin with, the process of disengagement has been almost completed after verification. That is the one big takeaway from the second statement issued by India this afternoon.
Right.
And the second point is India is reiterating its position, principled position, that agreements and understandings reached on boundary issues must be scrupulously respected. The reference here is to the 2012 agreement between India and China that any decision on the tri-junction where the borders of India, China and Bhutan meet should be resolved only through consultation with all 3 countries and not unilaterally. So that, to my mind, is a big takeaway from the second statement issued by India just a short while ago.
Ramesh, let me also ask you before we dive into our discussion, the timing of all of this. How important is the timing when it comes to the BRICS summit just about a week away? Do we think that played perhaps a role in all of this tensions between China and India sort of de-escalating? We still don't know at this point the impacts. I mean, did that play a crucial role in your opinion in this decision making? Absolutely,
Archit. There's no denying that any no-show by Prime Minister Modi at the BRICS summit, the 9th, to be held at Xiamen in China from 3rd to 5th of September, would come as a big embarrassment for China. Remember, BRICS is essentially economic grouping, and both India and China heavily invest in each other's economy. And any boycott, as it were, on the part of India would have sent the wrong signals to the world community at large. And to my mind, that was a big incentive for China also to resolve the standoff before the BRICS summit gets underway in Xiamen next month.
All right, let's also introduce our other guests for the discussion. We have wall-to-wall coverage here on WION for the next 4 hours until 10 o'clock tonight. We're also joined by Suvar Kumal Datta in our studios. He is a foreign analyst and expert, spending many years in the United States and the UK. We're also joined by Professor Swarun Singh. He's an expert on China. He joins us now from New Delhi. And of course, we have WION's Ramesh Ramachandran as well, our esteemed panel of guests. We're going to dive into the discussion in just a bit. But first, let's also listen into what the Chinese External Affairs Ministry had to say earlier on.
印方呢已经将越界的人员和设备全部撤回了边界的印方一侧，中方的现场人员对此进行了确认。中方呢将继续按照历史界约规定行使主权权利，维护领土主权。那么我也讲了，鉴于现场的情况已经出现了变化， 中方呢将根据现地的情况做出必要的调整和部署。
All right, let's get our discussion started this evening. Let's firstly start with Dr. Datta. Let's talk about the terms, the rules of the disengagement. We just heard from the MEA that the process is almost complete. Let's sort of break that down and explain what that means.
It means that, yes, there has to be peace and tranquility in the border, and neither of the countries should actually violate the border, you know, like at least until a final agreement is reached on the disputed areas of the border. And we do have a kind of an agreement with China that till there is a final solution, you know, like, I mean, the mutual respect for each other's concerns would be taken into account and it would be respected, you know. So that is something which the External Affairs Ministry has said it in a very clear terms. Second thing is, like, if you look into the afternoon statement of the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, he had used one very categorical term there.
Right.
He had said that the withdrawal is mutual from both the sides, you know, which is contradictory to what the External Affairs Ministry of the Chinese side has said, you know. China was once again trying to project its rhetoric by saying that we would have our presence in Doklam, you know. But what I understand is, like, the major concern for China was, like, China was getting isolated day by day at the global level.
So they had to sort of act quickly.
They had to look in for a you know, a face-saving device as such.
Right.
And this was the right opportune moment for them, because BRICS, as I said earlier, was knocking at the door. And as far as my information goes, the hidden channel or the backroom channel of the government of India had made it very categorically clear to the Chinese leadership that if you don't withdraw in relation to Doklam, the Premier of India would not participate. And the charter of the BRICS summit is such.
Right.
Charter of BRICS is as such, if any head of any participating state doesn't take part in the BRICS summit,
right,
then the summit does not take place.
So it's very crucial timing in terms of what happened.
And had that happened, it would have created a kind of a disaster for China,
okay,
not only internally, but also at the global level.
The global level. All right, let's continue this conversation. Let me now bring in Professor Swaran Singh joining us from New Delhi. Let's talk about the timing of all of this. You know, the BRICS summit, about a week away. Do you also believe that that timing played a crucial role in this sort of engagement process between India and China, and sort of taking a step back and de-escalating the situation at Doklam?
I think BRICS summit provided both leverages for India, but also opportunities for India to engage Chinese leaders at various levels, at official level and political level. But the last 1 week saw the focus being on whether Indian Prime Minister is going to visit there or not. And I think that really was a pressure point on Chinese side. And in the discussions, whether they are at official level or backroom, that must have really worked on Chinese minds, because India, next to China, is the most important economic power among BRICS, and indeed is growing faster than China now. So China could not have afforded India being absent from BRICS summit. Of course, it would also mean something for India, but it's much more for the host country. And I think that really worked on their mind. But remember, we are now talking of what statement has come. This is only first step. There are several series of other steps that need to be taken from here.
Right.
And therefore, I think India is not even now making clear whether Indian Prime Minister is visiting or not, because the process is still on. It has only started by saying that we have mutually agreed to call the standoff as coming to an end. But then whether the retreat is mutual, what is the actual process of retreat, whose soldiers are going where, and what is happening, those are still issues that may be under discussion as we speak now. So it will take some time for process to come out, and then we only know. Only thing we know now is both are agreeing that standoff is finished.
Right.
And I think that's good news. But that's not end of the story. I think coming 2, 3, 4, 5 days, we'll still see negotiations happening on the ground on both sides. And then maybe at end of it, you will see some clear signal of Indian Prime Minister really joining the BRICS summit. And I think therefore I'm saying BRICS summit provided opportunities, but also leverages for India in terms of conducting diplomacy and standing up Chinese in the standoff.
Certainly playing its diplomatic card, perhaps well, if experts would like to call it. Let me also bring in our correspondent, Raghavendra Rao, joining us from the WION newsroom. Raghavendra, let's also talk about post-BRICS. Could things go back to the status quo before today? Could things perhaps, was all of this perhaps just to get the wheels in motion for the BRICS summit to happen. Of course, we don't know if Prime Minister Narendra Modi will in fact attend that, but is there a likelihood that things could perhaps go back after the summit?
Well, hypothetically, yes, Archit, because yes, there is a growing feeling that this resolution of withdrawal from the Doklam plateau by both sides, it essentially appears to be a move triggered mainly from the Chinese side in a bid to save the BRICS summit, so to say.
Right.
And once it is confirmed whether Prime Minister Modi is going to BRICS and if the BRICS summit indeed takes place, yes, hypothetically, one can never rule out the possibility of things returning back to square one once BRICS is over.
Dr. Datta, let me bring you into the conversation. This is not the first time that India and China have sort of dealt with a situation like this. In fact, about 20 years ago, a similar situation unfolding, lasting several months. In fact, this a little bit more than 70 days. This, though, did get much more international attention. Do you think China had to sort of, as you mentioned earlier, save face and quickly respond so that it didn't face isolation, perhaps, from the international community?
Yes, I think if you look at the global level, China is actually getting isolated day by day, especially after the fiasco and the kind of, that kind of posturing which China had done in relation to the verdict on South China Sea, and China had refused to accept the verdict of the International Court of Justice. I think that had actually damaged the image of China in a big, big way at the global level. Now, after that, Doklam coming over and the kind of strong position which India took, China was not prepared for that, China thought that it could bully India and it could make India, agree to its terms and conditions, and it could annex in some more new areas in Bhutan. Along the Chinese and Bhutanese border. It had done that in the past. If you look into the northern areas of Bhutan, China has actually annexed in several areas in relation to Bhutan. So it was expecting that the Indian leadership would cow down and China would play its domination game across Asia Pacific as such. But the kind of straightforwardship which India had taken, and the kind of position which the Indian leadership had taken, that was something which was a bolt from the blue for China.
And perhaps something they didn't expect.
They were not prepared for that. Second is like the kind of statement which the President of United States of America recently gave in relation to Pakistan on the issue of terrorism. That is also something which is creating a lot of nervousness within China.
An ally of China and Pakistan.
Ally of, all-weathered ally of China is Pakistan, and China has got huge investment in Pakistan in relation to the CPEC, the economic corridor. If there would have been a kind of a limited war also with India, that would have got majorly affected, and China could not have afford to do that as such, and that would have created a kind of a disaster for China. Second is like if you look into the whole Asia Pacific region as such, the kind of military exercises and the strategic exercises which India, United States of America and Japan is doing, the Malabar exercises, and the Act East policy of India towards Southeast Asia and East Asia is also something which is creating concerns for China. So China was thinking that by creating Doklam, it could actually engage India at a very peripheral level and at a very localized level, and that way it could have negotiated on other things as such. But because of the kind of posturing which the Indian leadership took in relation to Doklam, there were two very clear signals. One was that India would stand up in relation to small nations. That's one. And the second thing is like under no condition would India jeopardize the bilateral treaty between India and Bhutan. So these two aspects is something which China was not prepared for.
Let me bring in Professor Swaran Swing as well to get perspective on that. Let me ask you, with international pressure mounting, perhaps is that the reason you believe that China had to sort of give in, if we'd like to call it, in terms of the Doklam standoff? I mean, this is not the first time India and its neighbors have certainly been at each other's throats, but this certainly provoking a lot of international attention, specifically given what is happening on both sides of the border. Your thoughts?
Definitely, whatever China is doing, whether it is good or bad, sometimes it is a matter of perceptions, draws attentions increasingly around the world. Second, of course, the fact that Kim Jong-un in North Korea has been excessively using and testing his missiles, which has also kind of created increased tensions in United States. And given the behavior of President Donald Trump, there have been some of the really strong statements coming from President Trump, both in case of North Korea and in case of Pakistan, which are both seen as friends of Beijing. And it puts additional pressure on Beijing, therefore, in conducting its affairs with other neighboring countries like India. And in that context, being under certain pressure internationally and being bolstered by the behavior it has had in South China Sea, by causing dissensions in ASEAN, it has made sure that ASEAN has never developed a cohesive response to Chinese behavior in South China Sea. So much so that despite the arbitration judgment coming in July last year,
right,
the president of Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, decided to ignore it. And that really embolstered the Chinese behavior. And they thought that they could do similar things in South Asia as well. And I agree. Yes, therefore, it was a bit of a surprise for Chinese when India decided to stand up,
right,
especially stand up for a smaller neighbor. But to say that this has come to an end, I think that will be really jumping the gun. It is only one step at this stage. These kind of standoffs might come back again in future. We all understand Chinese have compulsions of BRICS summit coming up in the face, India's presence being really important there. That could have worked in our favor in that sense. Also created opportunities, as mentioned, to meet Chinese at various levels. But this is only a small step in that direction. A lot more will continue to happen in coming days and weeks. And I think in long term,
right,
India really is leaving a message here that India would stand up against China if need be, with restraint, with calm behavior, but India would stand up. And that is a message that comes out of these 72 days.
All right, we'll continue the discussion in just a bit, but now let me also get perspective and reaction that's coming in on this issue.
I think the fact that both countries managed to, get out of this situation without a shooting match means that, in a sense, it was a draw. But in another sense, I think both countries lost because the relationship has been very badly damaged because of the kind of rhetoric which has come out of China.
It is a tremendous diplomatic victory for our country that both the countries' armies have agreed to pull back. This standoff was going on since about 2 months, and despite Chinese threats through media that we should withdraw, otherwise there will be a war, we were hanging on there. All the credit goes to the government decision to hang on there, and that's why we have got a diplomatic victory. It's a
All right, let's continue our discussion with our guests. Let me now bring in our correspondent, Raghavendra Rao. Interesting reaction coming in there, Raghavendra, about who lost, who won. In your words, I mean, were there any winners, in fact, in any of this? I mean, was this really the message that India was trying to project to say to its neighbors, we cannot be bullied. We have a strong sentiment and we will not give in. Your thoughts?
Well, Archit, it will be a little premature to say who won or who lost, but the fact that both the countries have managed to resolve this amicably, at least at the face of it,
right,
and have decided to withdraw their troops from a contentious point, that itself goes on to show that diplomacy has worked. Despite all the warmongering that happened, especially from the Chinese side. Some of their media were, reporting very provocatively about the possibility and, the need for China to go all guns blazing against India. The fact that the matter has been resolved, at least for the time being, just goes on to show some maturity on part of both the sides. Now, the latest bit we are hearing is that China indeed has stopped the construction of that contentious road in Doklam. That can be seen as a huge diplomatic victory because it brings the situation to the earlier status before this face-off erupted. And considering that, yes, if that contentious road is not being built anymore and if both sides have retreated, diplomacy has won for the day.
All right, let me also bring in Professor Swaran Singh into the conversation as well. Let me also ask you with regards to all of this, next steps, the likely scenarios that could be played out in the coming days, in the coming weeks. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I am happy to hear that diplomacy has won. But this is also where we need to really give some credit to our soldiers on the border. The restraint that they showed, and we saw both in Doklam simply pushing and shoving, and of course some stone pelting in case of Ladakh area. But enormous restraint on both sides also shows how mature these two countries' soldiers are in conducting their affairs, even when things get agitated. But as far as coming few days will be, I think the most important on both sides will be to get a statement from India. Chinese would try their best to get a statement from India that Indian Prime Minister is joining the BRICS summit. And right now, that is the most important event on their mind. Meanwhile, both sides didn't have too much of soldiers on the border. So, these are small numbers. They can immediately be relocated without much difficulty, without much fanfare or notice. So once two sides in principle have agreed to call it the day, that physical removal of forces on the ground is not something which is very difficult. It has happened several times before. But I think in long run, both sides are going to be focus on how to deal with these cis-Himalayan states.
Okay.
And India need to have to be much more careful in dealing with Bhutan. For example, even at this stage, it should not appear that China and India have just together agreed and resolved this problem.
Right.
Resolution will happen with Bhutan on board. And that is the kind of thing which India has to be careful in coming weeks and days.
All right. We appreciate your input as well as all of our guests, Ramesh Ramachandran earlier on, Raghavendra Rao, Dr. Datta, and Professor Singh. Thank you so much for joining in and giving us your take on the India-China standoff. Well, that's all the time that we have for this bulletin, but stay tuned for a series of special shows only on WION. Coming up next at 7 p.m., China betrays nervousness. At 8 p.m., we have Rhetoric versus the Ground Reality, hosted by Molly Gambir. And at 9 p.m., we have The Big Picture, getting you reaction perspective from various voices and the full story. At 9 o'clock on Gravitas with Palki Sharma Upadhyay. I'm Archit Tishari.